When I was young, I wanted to learn what it was like to be a natural human being, live off the land, get rid of all the conditionings of society, and find out what a true human being is. I was real fortunate that I wanted to just become a natural human being. I didn't want to become a spiritual teacher, but that's a story for another video. So I was living way out in the woods in Idaho, and it's very remote here where I live. We're on the one of the largest wilderness areas in the United States, and I lived in a little tiny house, and I had kids, and I grew giant gardens. And one day I remember I was sitting there meditating. Um, I opened my eyes, and there is a little mouse running across my floor. My house was like basically a hut. It was this, it wasn't a big fancy house, and it had a lot of mice in it. This mouse runs across the floor and stops and looks at me. Mouse is looking at me. I'm looking at the mouse. And I just noticed that the mouse's eyes were just completely bright and full of fear. And I'm like, whoa, a mouse is a completely natural entity, natural being. And there it is in its natural environment, just completely full of fear, looking at me. And then, of course, it scampers away. And I remembered that, deer, I lived around really a lot of deer as well. And deer have that exact same look in their eyes. That look of just, it's like fear. And they're always looking like that. And I suddenly realized fear is a natural thing. And I had, of course, believed so many of the same spiritual stories that we all believe, that enlightened people are always happy, always blissful, that, that you never, ever feel a negative emotion again when you're enlightened. And I'm like, but wait a minute. Fear, then, is like this completely natural, normal thing. And the mouse wasn't being crushed by its fear. It was actually being served by its fear, because it's looking at me. I'm the enemy, right? I could very easily be going after the mouse. The same thing with the deer. And so I suddenly realized that, wait a minute. If I want to be a natural human being, I have to accept, not even accept, every single part of me is created correctly. And so from that moment on, I never, ever tried to manipulate my inner world to only have happiness, to only have positivity. And what I found was, it's not even like I accepted fear and I accepted anger and I accepted frustration. It was more like, oh, anger, fear, frustration, happiness, joy, tiredness, awakeness, energy. Just, the second that I accepted the fact that I'm created correctly. And yes, there's really a lot of conditionings from society that make me be nuts, that make my mind be nuts. But me, I'm created correctly. Once I realized that, I became able to move forward positively. I shouldn't be using that word, right? I was able to move forward dynamically in my spiritual search. And when you kind of think about it, what really happened in that moment was I grew up. I became a fully functioning adult. I stopped trying to manipulate my life and my environment towards only those things that I considered positive. And I stopped trying to avoid the negative. Instead, I just used myself as a vehicle. I'm here, I'm doing these things. And when you think about it, like think about that moment, from that moment on, I became a completely reliable human being. Because I couldn't, it's like, oh, you just did something and you made me feel negative. That thought, I see other people do that thought all the time, and that never happens for me because, like, why would I care? Like, you just made me feel negative. So what? You just made me feel happy. So what? The happiness has a reason. The frustration has a reason. Everything works when you live your life that way. And I believe now looking back, that is the first step towards any actual spiritual revelation. Because if you are trying to manipulate yourself only towards what you've labeled as positive, you're just caught in a constant trap of manipulation. Now, it would be very cool if it actually worked, but it doesn't work. I know people who are very, very, very good at looking like they're always positive. But man, do they blow when you crack that crack, which I kind of seem to be able to do accidentally just by being me. So we're created correctly. That's step number 1. If you want to be successful, if you want to have a family, if you want to have a good relationship, if you want to move towards enlightenment, if you want to eventually be awake.